for really the 100 years that this has been a subbase, and will for, as the head of the Navy's Installations Division said, we'll have an enduring mission for many years to come, and that's really obviously a powerful message for the community and really for our challengers. I just want to end by saying that, Senator Dodd, when he had that little moment, he had the Constitution behind him. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 13 says that the Congress shall provide and maintain a Navy. And nobody understood that better, actually, than Admiral Rickover. Anyone who's read that book, Against the Tide, by retired Admiral Dave Oliver, talks about how, one of his geniuses was his ability to sometimes go above and around Navy leadership to make sure that this project, which was almost universally condemned within the Navy as being worth moving forward. But he had, again, benefactors in Congress who were there to support him. Senator Brian McMahon, who there's high schools and monuments named after down in Stamford. But he also performed. I mean, when you think about it, Congress authorized the construction of Nautilus in July 1951, and it was launched 2.5 years later in January 1954. That is a staggering accomplishment for first in class of any platform, let alone one that was powered by nuclear reactors. And he did it with an incredible eye on the budget. In Admiral Oliver's book, he talks about how the Nautilus was built from used parts, a diesel submarine already under construction, liquid holding tanks from a bankrupt New Jersey dairy, emergency diesel engine salvaged from a minesweeper that had been spent the last few years sunk on the bottom of a river, and a refurbished engine room appropriated from a pre-World War II destroyer. He was thus able to build the world's first nuclear-powered submarine for less than $70 million. And obviously, the dollar was worth a lot less than or a lot more, rather, than it is today. But still, to be able to do that and then have it serve for 21 years, I mean, it's an accomplishment in so many different levels, including acquisition, which is no mean feat. So again, congratulations to all from the region who made this possible, with the new water taxi dock that's going to be up and running next summer, and then with the new Coast Guard Museum across the way. This is going to be a walkable, huge destination of maritime history for this country for many years to come. And again, it's something that everyone who is participating in this should feel very proud of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the junior United States Senator from Connecticut, the Honorable Chris Murphy.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to all who have made this incredible day possible. I apologize for being a few minutes late, the result of a delayed flight from Washington, D.C., but I did not want to miss this miraculous moment. I know how many people were involved in making this day possible, how much advocacy it took, both from the delegation, from the team representing Southeastern Connecticut, from the Navy. And I want to just explain to you how much this matters to us and how much this matters to the country. Today, our undersea platform matters more than ever before. It is increasingly indispensable. And as no one knows better than Joe Courtney, the price tag is significant. And so we have to be able to make this case to our colleagues about why this continued investment in undersea warfare and undersea platforms matters to the security of the nation. And of course, we don't have the chance to bring our colleagues, to bring voters, to bring taxpayers onto the latest and greatest of the technology that we are producing. But right here, this is an opportunity for the people of Connecticut, for the people of this country to see what we produce, to have an ability to access, this platform, to have an ability to access one of the most significant historic ships that has ever gone to sea. And so for us, this is really vital because it helps us tell this story. It helps us generate enthusiasm and support for the programming that this nation so badly needs. And it's just a wonderful story for Connecticut to tell. I'm sure I missed some great history about the Nautilus, but I'll just share with you maybe my favorite story. I don't think it's been shared thus far. In 1955, one of the few joint committee hearings of the House and the Senate was held, and it was held inside that ship underwater. In 1955, March 20th, the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy met, and here is the entry from the congressional record. On March 20th, 1955, the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy met pursuant to call at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time Standard aboard the Nautilus at sea beyond the continental shelf at a depth in excess of 300 feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. On board were 12 members of the committee. There were 7 congressmen and 5 senators. Senator Albert Gore Sr. was aboard, as well as Senator Bork Hickenlooper of Iowa. Senator Gore, of course, the father of our former vice president, and Senator Hickenlooper, the great uncle of present-day Senator John Hickenlooper from Colorado. Admiral Rickover testified before the committee. The meeting lasted about an hour and a half, and the record notes that the senators and representatives were so impressed at the hearing that they approved a motion to recommend that the Air Force determine whether experience gained in building atomic submarines might not be applicable to the development of reactors for aircraft's nuclear propulsion. As terrifying as that may be, a nuclear-powered airplane, you can be rest assured that that program never got its start from the United States Congress or the Atomic Energy Committee. But it's just another wonderful story about how important this history is. And finally, to just tack on to Senator Courtney's last point, what an opportunity we have now in this corner of our state to talk about the history of the relationship between America and the sea, between this new facility, between what's happening at the Coast Guard Museum, the number of new businesses and residences that are being brought to southeastern Connecticut. This is going to be a tourist destination for millions of Americans to come and learn about this vital history, both to the United States generally and to the security of our nation. And so I'm just so grateful and thankful to all the people here who have made this day possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Nautilus revolutionized the use of nuclear power, harnessing the atom and pioneering the way for more than 200 U.S. nuclear-powered submarines. She is the foundation upon which our nation and Navy, through the submarine force, have transformed national defense and maritime strategy. To introduce our next distinguished speaker at this celebration, please join me in welcoming Captain David Grogan from the Undersea Warfighting Development Center.
Good afternoon. It's my distinct pleasure to represent Rear Admiral Muckian and the Undersea Warfighting Development Center and introduce Vice Admiral Bill Houston. Vice Admiral Houston is a career submarine officer serving aboard 4 submarines, including command of USS Hampton. Ashore, he served as Commander, Submarine Squadron 20, Deputy Director for Strategic Targeting and Nuclear Mission Planning at U.S. Strategic Command, Director of Operations for U.S. Naval Forces Europe and Africa, Deputy Commander of the U.S. 6th Fleet, Commander Submarine Group 8 and Director Undersea Warfare Division, Office of the Chief of Naval Operations, N97. As Commander Submarine Forces, he is the Undersea Domain Lead and is responsible for the Submarine Forces Strategic Vision. As Commander Submarine Force Atlantic, he commands all Atlantic-based U.S. submarines, their crews, and supporting shore activities. These responsibilities also include duties as Commander, Task Force 114, 88, and 46. As Commander, Allied Submarine Command, he provides advice to NATO strategic commanders on submarine-related issues. Please join me in welcoming Apex Predator Number 1, Vice Admiral Bill Houston.
Just an amazing day. What I'd like to start off with and say is, it was underway on nuclear power, big event for us, but I think underway on Nautilus and mooring and open for tours is just as big here. So really congratulations to the whole team that pulled that off. As you look at Nautilus, it's truly remarkable what Nautilus was at the time in 55, 54 when we commissioned and were underway on nuclear power. It kept our adversaries on the heels. It made record after record. That was incredible. But what it's really meant to us is so much more. It's really epitomized our undersea advantage as a nation and our ability as Americans to innovate and rapidly come up with things that are essential for our freedom and our way of life. And you look at what Nautilus did in the Cold War, it broke the back of the Soviet Union there. Nautilus itself didn't, but what Nautilus represented and the ability to transform the submarine force into our asymmetric advantage, as Dave used my own words, into the ultimate apex predator, our overmatch against all adversaries that the submarine capital of the world represents, is foundational for our national defense. We have 50 attack submarines, 14 strategic missile submarines, 4 guided missile submarines, class upon class of submarines. But do not forget, without the people that operate, the people that maintain them, the people that train the people, the families that support those people, they are wonderful machines, but they are just pieces of steel. And it is the families and the people that is our ultimate asymmetric advantage. And when you took a look at what Admiral Rickover did, he was really an asymmetric advantage, but he was one person with a vision and a leader, and it took an entire team of dedicated workers and patriots that made this a reality. And getting this submarine back under budget and on time early, I'll say, is a tremendous feat, and it's fitting of Nautilus, who's the first of her kind. That legacy continues to drive our force today. Our overmatch in the undersea is foundational from that. We couldn't do it without the men and women that we do for active duty. In this place, every submariner will come back here. It's our initial training pipeline. It's our advanced courses. It's really what submariners call home. And to be able to open this and show the world what submariners do and the legacy of excellence that this ship started and continue today is just truly a great honor for me to be. And I'm honored to be here, but I'm more honored to be here with you to represent what the submarine force represents for America and all the partnerships we have with everybody. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Admiral. Even with Nautilus' impactful legacy, the investment in her future during challenging budgetary environments was not easy. The planning for her preservation started back in 2015 with the Navy's issuance of the minimum required maintenance to support continuous museum operations. That was just the start. For 6 years, we fought for this opportunity. A group of the smartest and brightest from several organizations developed a plan and constructed a maintenance standard for historic ship Nautilus from absolutely nothing. Their extraordinary efforts reduced the proposed cost of this preservation from around $150 million down to the executed $36 million. Through it all, the Nautilus and the museum have continued to tell the stories of the bold and courageous submariners that have served or are serving. To date, Nautilus has engaged more than 3 million people since she became the focal point of this museum. Over 100,000 man-hours just in execution across dozens of organizations with a single combined goal: a 30-year clean bill of health and the ability for Nautilus to safely stay attached to our museum pier and tell her story for 3 more decades to 3 million more people. To appropriately introduce our next distinguished speaker at this celebration, please join me in welcoming Retired Admiral John B. Paget III, President of the Submarine Force Library and Museum Association.
Thank you, Commander. Appreciate that introduction. This is the perfect place for a submarine museum. Just down the river, the people, the men and women who design and build submarines work at Electric Boat. And just up the river, the men and women who operate and maintain submarines operate and maintain them very, very well. Having this museum at this location is the ideal spot, and having this ship delivered early and ahead of, and under budget is the perfect indication of where we're going in the future. Much has been mentioned about all the hard work and preparation that went into getting ready for this availability. The organization that saw to it that this availability was carried off, that the money was sustained and the budget was executed was the Naval History and Heritage Command. And the officer who was responsible for ensuring that that command did that mission is our next speaker, Rear Admiral Sam Cox.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Due to time, I would say that all salutations and greetings remain in effect. However, I do want to specifically express my extreme gratitude to the Senate Congressional State Delegation of Connecticut and the people and the politicians of Groton and New London, all of which made a difference in my efforts to try to push this through the Navy bureaucracy in knowing that people up here really cared. It made a difference. So I have the unenviable task of trying to think up something that hasn't already been said in the number of speakers here. So let me begin by, okay, she's the first submarine to have atomic power. So what? The Allies nearly came perilously close to losing both World War I and World War II due to German submarines. And although we won World War II, the cost was 52 U.S. submarines and over 3,000 American sailors that went down with those boats. And the critical thing was that the critical weakness of a submarine was that sooner or later it had to come up for air, either to run the diesels, generate power for redoing the batteries, or air for the crew. Well, earlier, just before World War II, and when nuclear fission was discovered in 1938, the famed physicist Enrico Fermi gave a lecture in Washington, D.C. that was attended by the technical director of the Naval Research Laboratory, Ross Gunn. And he was sitting in that briefing, and the light bulb went off. He's talking about nuclear fission. We can use that as a power source to drive submarines and prevent them from having to come up for air. He was able the very next day to convince the director of naval research to commit the incredible sum of $1,500 to the study of atomic energy for submarines. All of that was put on the shelf during World War II because everything related to atomic power, nuclear energy, went to the Manhattan Project and the development of an atomic bomb. But at the end of the war, we discovered that although we had won, we're still facing massively armed adversary with an ideology that's inimical to our way of life, and we're very quickly engaged in a competition for who would establish dominance for the rest of history, if you will. I'm talking about the Soviet Union and the dictator in charge, Stalin. So everything in the 1950s was a race, and we won. This submarine was built fast, designed fast, got underway fast, beat the Russians out of the block. Everyone knows about Sputnik. That thing went up around the orbit, had a beeper on it. This revolutionized naval warfare, submarine warfare. I got that backwards. Not only submarine warfare, but all of naval warfare. Today, we don't really remember, except some of us old guys, the existential nature of the threat during the Cold War, where there were literally thousands of nuclear weapons on each side, on hair trigger alert, pointed at each other, ready to wipe each other off the map in what was called mutually assured destruction, mutually assured insanity, but that was the strategy at the time. And so this submarine and the ones that followed got out ahead of the Russians. We didn't get everything right off the bat. We lost 2 of them in the 1960s because we didn't have everything right. The Soviets lost more because they were trying to catch up. It was a dangerous business, and even more dangerous because the difference between a submarine in the Cold War and actual war, the only difference between what they did in either one was whether they pulled the trigger or not. Same tactics, same everything going on under the water, basically knowing where the Russian submarines are and being able to do something about it if that caused, and yet one itchy trigger finger could cost a nuclear holocaust. That didn't happen. The United States was expecting that the war with the Soviet Union would result in another battle of the Atlantic, convoys trying to get across Soviet submarine. That actually turned out not to be the case. By the 1980s, due to intelligence collected mostly by these submarines, we were able to determine that the entire Soviet Navy and their entire strategy was built around protecting their nuclear ballistic missile submarines from the Nautilus and her successors. And by the 1980s, they had figured out that they couldn't do it. We were ahead. We were staying ahead. If they pulled the trigger first, they were going to lose because of these submarines. And the solution, from their perspective, was going to bankrupt their entire defense budget. And as a result of these submarines and the work that they did was one of those things that poked the house of cards of the Soviet economy and brought about the end of the Cold War. And if you ask, okay, well, so what? I would say that there are millions of people who are alive today because of these submarines and the fact that they never had to fire a shot in anger against the Soviet Union. That's the so what. So, I would just, add on this is that, it took 6 years of getting through the Navy bureaucracy to finally get to the Vice Chief of Naval Operations. The CNO at the time was Admiral Richardson. He was a submariner. He was very much wanted to save this submarine, but he didn't want to, because this is all the money. We're short of money to do everything that that's gone all the way back to George Washington. You don't have enough money to operate and maintain the fleet. That never changes. But this submarine, when I was finally able to get to the Vice Chief of Naval Op, because the CNO delegated it so he wouldn't be, accused of being partial to his submarine, I was able to go, hey, VCNO, repairing it and keeping it for another 30 years is half the cost of getting rid of it. And he goes, I don't even need the brief. This is a no-brainer. Done, and I wish I could have got to him 6 years earlier. Anyway, so let me, at this point, there were 2 people who worked for me who were instrumental in making this happen, and I gloss over it, but the amount of work that went into trying to get this through the system in the face of intense budgetary pressure, because all kinds of things to do, other things to do with that money. But I would argue that the significance of this mattered, the support of the congressional district mattered. But if we could bring 2 up for Mr. Dave Adams, who's the director of Navy Museums Division, who I had the luck to hire a former nuclear submariner to do that job, and Mr. Pat Burns, who's my deputy director, who actually prepared all the briefings that went forward and made a difference. So.
To Captain Burns for leading the charge in updating command relationships between Sublant and NHHC to take on the responsibility to protect and preserve the legacy of Nautilus, exploring all options for preservation from a $417 million dry berth to a $73 million scrap, and ultimately secured the $36 million preservation, leading the working group that developed the unique maintenance standards requirements for Nautilus. To Captain Adams for reorganizing the Museum Operations Division into the Navy Museums Division, directly resulting in the command's capability to perform the dry docking availability of Nautilus. Single-handedly planned and oversaw the execution of the 10-month-long preservation availability, which was flawlessly executed, closed out ahead of schedule, and under the $36 million budget. His skills as a submariner, planner, budgeter, leader, and manager ensured the project's success, allowing Nautilus to continue to serve her country for another 30 years. Thank you, Admiral. The U.S. Navy and the submarine force are deeply rooted in traditions. From the age of wooden ships and iron men to high-strength steel alloys and nuclear reactors. From the tattoos, the songs, the ceremonies, everything has a place in how we recognize these significant occasions. The USS Nautilus was commissioned on September 30th in 1954 by then First Lady Mamie Eisenhower. The First Lady ushered in a new age in our U.S. Navy's history. Separated now by nearly 70 years, we have an opportunity to show our respect and gratitude to all those that have taken part in that new age, the Nautilus age. A chance to salute all those that designed, built, served, converted, maintained, continue to maintain the Nautilus, and those who do so for our ongoing submarine force and the rest of the nuclear fleet. And in a tip-of-the-hat way to Navy traditions, we will recommission the Nautilus and once again bring this historic ship to life to inform, educate, and engage the public. To help me in that effort, I ask you to join me in welcoming Mr. Lonnie Barnum, crew member of the USS Nautilus and now president of the Nautilus Alumni Association.
First, I'm pleased that Admiral Paget has done away with the salutations and greetings that can carry on for a long time. So I'm just going to welcome today the entire submarine community. I'm so impressed with how many of you are sitting here today and how many dolphins I see out there and how many hats and other items that tell me that you actually rode a nuclear submarine. Thank you for gathering here today on this auspicious occasion. As president of the Nautilus Alumni Association, I represent the approximately 2,500 crew members who, from 1954 until today, sail this wonderful ship, or boat, as we like to call it in the submarine force. Unfortunately, half that 2,500 have gone on to eternal patrol. But we will remember and honor them forever. Of course, the best way to honor those who served aboard this boat for the past 68 years and to keep alive the historic accomplishments of this great lady is to preserve her. And the Submarine Force Library and Museum, with the support of Navy leadership, the larger submarine community, and the public, has done just that. The museum has preserved Nautilus so that she can remain in the hearts and minds of America. For that, the Nautilus Alumni Association is indebted to and extremely grateful to the Navy and museum leadership who made this restoration possible. Thank you, Commander Sutton, for leading the restoration effort. Our Alumni Association hosts a reunion here every 2 years. It's purposely held in southeastern Connecticut, just so that former crew members can visit their boat. By preserving this piece of America, you have made it possible for our reunion visits to this boat to continue. So, from all members of the Nautilus Alumni Association, a sincere thank you to the flag officers present today, especially to Admiral Paget and the entire submarine community for making this preservation possible. I'd now like to introduce my daughter, Jennifer Murray, a true child of Nautilus, to share her thoughts. Jennifer?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. To say that I grew up on the Nautilus would be a fairly accurate statement. Of course, I didn't serve aboard this great ship, but I lived Nautilus through my father, who in a way did grow up on this ship. He reported aboard as an 18-year-old and left at 21, so in many ways he grew up aboard the world's first nuclear submarine. From the time I was 2 to 3 years old and first began to understand stories my father told me, I knew the Nautilus. That's how early my father began regaling me and my brother with tales of the adventures he experienced aboard this wonderful ship. Stories about surfacing north of the Arctic Circle to fix an electronics mast while on a classified mission. Stories about colliding with an aircraft carrier while at periscope depth and plummeting downward before the ship was brought under control. Stories about the great friends, the great camaraderie, and the great accomplishments he enjoyed during his 3 years aboard Nautilus. And the stories continued throughout the rest of my early childhood. When I was 11 or so, my dad took me to see the Nautilus shortly after she docked here and was designated Historic Ship Nautilus, and became the primary attraction of this great museum. I'll never forget that first visit to Dad's boat. As he led us through the compartments and passageways and pointed out his duty station at the helm and the diving planes and his bunk in the torpedo room, I could see the pride in his eyes. It was obviously a true homecoming for him. He had come back to what had been his home for 3 years. I could almost see the flood of memories cascading into his mind as his eyes became misty and his voice cracked. At that point, I knew that, although he loved his family more than anything, he also loved this boat. Dad brought me back to the boat several times in the following years. Finally, at some point, as a young teenager, I did have to tell him, Dad, I think I know the Nautilus as well as you do. Let's stop the visits for a little while. He understood, but let me tell you, as soon as I had children and they were old enough to walk, Dad began bringing them to the Nautilus. It's his boat, and he'll never stop bringing his family to see it. It's a huge privilege for me to stand here today and welcome this new national treasure back to her permanent home. And I'm thankful to the public, the U.S. Navy, and the entire submarine community for restoring Nautilus to the great ship in front of us today. And thus ensuring that she will be able to tell her story for many years to come. Personally, I plan to visit her many times in the future, and I sincerely hope that the Nautilus, her story, her accomplishments, and the men who sailed her remain in America's memory forever. Now it is my great honor to issue this command. Crew of the historic ship Nautilus, reman the ship and bring her to life.
Thank you, Jennifer. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Another tradition is formally recognizing the outstanding work done by individuals throughout the course of an availability. These sailors stood out for their dedication to this project. Their exceptional deck plate impact on operations, management, and execution of the availability significantly contributed to Nautilus's safe and efficient underways, early undocking, early delivery, and overall the best possible quality of life for their shipmates. Vice Admiral Houston, will you please join me in presenting these awards?
If the guests would please rise. Military attendees, attention to award. To Chief Valunez and Petty Officer Horning for outstanding performance in having led 30 sailors in mechanical, electrical, and logistics divisions through the 100,000 man-hour, $36 million preservation overhaul of historic ship Nautilus, coordinating with external organizations to resolve issues, allowing the ship to undock early and under budget. They were directly responsible for the planning and execution of the ship's mooring and ballasting plans following the overhaul, ensuring safe operation at the museum pier for the next 30 years. Concurrent with the overhaul, they managed the implementation of a new material management system on board, saving countless man-hours and improving ship and site material readiness. At ease. Ladies and gentlemen, now the moment for which you have all been so patiently waiting, the grand reopening of Nautilus. Senator Murphy, Congressman Courtney, Admiral Cox, Admiral Pashman, will you please join Vice Admiral Houston and the OIC for the ribbon cutting? To close out our celebration, I ask everyone to please rise as we celebrate our country, the Navy, and the Nautilus. Nautilus, attention!